This is Viva Fry.
I'm Dr. Peter McCullough.
This is Tom Luongo.
This is Chuck Prodnick.
This is Alex Kreiner.
Hey, this is Brad Wall.
This is JP Sears.
Hi, this is Frank Peretti.
This is Tammy Peterson.
This is Danielle Smith.
This is James Lindsay.
Hey, this is Brett Kissel, and you're listening to the Shaun Newman Podcast.
Welcome to the podcast, folks. Happy Monday. How's everybody doing today? Did you know that you can hold physical gold and silver in your registered accounts? I'm talking RRSP, TFSAs, RIF, or Kids RESP. By adding physical gold and silver to your account, yes, you can do that. Silver and Gold Bull can help you do that. And if you want to find out more, just make sure you get your questions in before March 3rd. That's the deadline, RRSP deadline for making contributions. Once you've made them, you can invest into physical precious metals at any time. All you got to do is text or email Grahame for details down in the show notes. Of course, I'm going to recommend Silver Gold Bull. And anytime you're on Silver Gold Bull and you're doing any business with them, just make sure you reference that you heard about them from SNP, the Shaun Newman Podcast. Helps them know you're paying attention. Bow Valley Credit Union is your Alberta-regulated full-service financial institution. Alberta residents can take advantage of low or no-cost bank accounts. I don't know why I said it that way. Personal and business mortgages, loans, credit cards, and investing. Happy Monday. How's everybody doing? With 100% deposit guarantee compared to big banks with they only have 1,000 in deposit guarantees, as well as gold and silver in reserve. Don't leave your hard-earned savings in trust with Ottawa's standard of inflation and devaluation of currency and taxation. Why not hop on board with Bow Valley Credit Union? Shoot Leanna an email at welcome@bowvalleycu.com, and she can get you squared away for all your banking needs. Head to bowvalleycu.com, all right? You can send an email there. You can also just visit there. Clay Smiley, a team over at Prophet River. When it comes to firearms, these are the folks. They specialize in importing firearms, that is, from the United States of America. They pride themselves on making this process as easy for all their customers as humanly possible, and they are sharp, and they can answer all your questions. And their selection is quite immense. I was going to say, immense. They do consignment as well, so you can get lightly used guns. Is that the way to say it? Yeah, I think that's the way to say it. And you might be able to find a couple of gems in there, and they can act as, I don't know, I hope I'm not saying it wrong, Ed. I think the broker. I think that's the right word. Also, if you're like, I have no idea what I would get my significant other from Prophet River, that's all right. They got gift cards for all those hunters or sportsmen in your life. You can just go to ProphetRiver.com and find out more there. They ship across Canada, and they are the major retailer of firearms, optics, and accessories, once again serving all of Canada. Windsor Plywood, builders of the podcast studio table. They're supplying a whole bunch of things for the new podcast studio as well. Whether we're talking mantles, decks, windows, doors, sheds, and a whole bunch of things podcast related. When it comes to wood, look no further than Windsor Plywood and stop in and see Carly Klassen and the team here in Lloydminster. Tell them I sent ya. Sent ya. Oh, boy. Happy Monday. Cornerstone Forum. Did you pay? Wait. Full stop. Did you? I can't even spit it out. Are you on Substack? What are you doing if you're not on Substack? The new trailer for the Cornerstone Forum dropped yesterday. Oh, yeah. And let me tell you, it's going to hit you in the feels. So if you haven't bought a ticket yet, you're like, I think I better buy a ticket to that. And if you're wondering who's narrating that, that's the Cowboy Preacher. Man, it sounds good. It looks good, too. And we got a whole cast of characters showing up May 10th in Calgary. You need to be there and get all the details in the latest Substack. So drop back to Substack. It's free to subscribe to. And yesterday's post is free to all you. You can go find out more about what's coming May 10th. New studio coming here in 2025. We're looking for skills, labor, materials, money, a whole bunch of different ways to get a part of that. T-Bar One Trucking and Guardian and Harris Electric, all of those companies doing a little bit of this and that over the last couple days, and things coming together. Become a paid subscriber on Substack, and you can see all the inner workings of it. Just saying. You don't have to do that either. Or you could just do some... You can do some simple things and get your name on the legacy wall, the value for value wall that we're going to be putting in there. If you want to find out more details, shoot me a text. Would love to bring you up to speed. If you're listening or watching on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Rumble, make sure to subscribe. Make sure to leave a review. Make sure to share with a friend. Make sure if you're on X that you're staring at the screen right now listening, you hit retweet and break us out of some of the, I don't know. Am I being shadow banned? I don't know. If you like what the show is doing, just make sure to hit a retweet. Make sure to share it with a friend. And would love to. Chris Thiel, shout out to Chris Thiel. He did a video clip of my conversation with Tim Kasperk and Natasha Gonick. If any of you want to clip up some things and put it on social media, here's my consent. Have at her. The Shaun Newman podcast is there for you to have some fun with it. You find some spots that you're like, man, that was a great little clip. Put it out there. I'm good with it. I thought it was awesome what Chris Thiel did. He put it on Instagram, tagged me in it. I thought that was super cool. So if you got a little, video editing bug in your blood, and you go, man, that was a cool spot, clip it, put it out, tag me in it. Would love to see it. Want you guys to engage with this as much as humanly possible. All right, that's what I got for you today. Happy Monday. Now, let's get on to that tale of the tape. He's an independent journalist and researcher known for his show, The Corbett Report. I'm talking about James Corbett. So buckle up. Here we go. Welcome to the Shaun Newman podcast. Today I'm joined by James Corbett. Thanks for making some time. You're sitting in Japan, right?
I am sitting in Japan with my Chicago mug. I should have my Tim Hortons mug. I guess it would be more appropriate for our discussion, but sorry.
Now, we don't know one another. I don't, the interesting thing about you from my side is along my journey, your name has been shared a lot. And I've been like, oh yeah, sure. Like one here, one there. And then, like over the course of 3-4 years, I'm like, who is this guy? I got to go find this guy. So I've watched a bunch of your stuff. I'm like, this is really fascinating. But let's assume, and I got to really change this up, folks. But regardless, it's his first time on the show. Give us the backstory, because from what I understand, you started your show in 2007. I want to know the ins and outs. I want to know it all.
Yeah, I started a podcast in 2007, which is before podcasts existed, according to most people these days. Joe Rogan invented that in like 2011, didn't he? Nope. Anyway, yeah. So I guess which part of the story should I start with? I should probably start with the part of the story where I was born in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And I won't date myself exactly, but decades ago, we'll say, at the General Hospital, which I watched blown up on TV back in 1999, whenever it was blown up. So there you go. That's my birth origin story. And I grew up in a rural Alberta, in and around Airdrie, St. Albert, moving back to Calgary, what have you. Got my first class honors degree in English literature from the University of Calgary. What do you do with that? Well, I decided, hey, I'll go for my master's. So I went to Dublin for a year to get a master's in Anglo-Irish literature. And then I was kind of casting about, like just thinking, well, what am I going to do with my life? I don't know. But it's funny because whenever anyone asks me, what are you going to do with your degrees? I always had two stipulations. One, I am not going to be a teacher. Two, I am not going to be a journalist. And so it was as I was walking around on campus in Dublin one day, I ran into one of my friends. I asked him what he was doing. He said, I've just been looking into teaching English in Asia. And I thought, ding, that sounds like an idea. That's something I can do, kill a year, get some money, see a new part of the world. Cool. So I start looking it up. Next thing you know, I'm applying. I'm getting a job to go teach English in Japan. Okay, I'll go do that for a year and come back to Canada and start my real career, whatever that's going to be. And well, it's been 21 years this year. So I guess I never managed to make it back to Canada. But yeah, somewhere along the way there, 2006
so 2003?
specifically.
2003.
So I left. I left 2004. So this is the 21st year this year. So in 2006, I was moving between apartments here in Japan. And it was the first time in several years that I was moving into a place that came with an internet connection. I'd been going to internet cafes essentially to, check my email up till that point for the last few years. And so here I'm living in a place with an internet connection. Cool. And I connect online, and, there's all these cool new things, YouTube and Google Video and things that existed at that time, which allowed me to essentially access all this information, whatever I wanted, anytime I wanted, which is the real paradigm shift that we've undergone in the past couple of decades, because I have enough gray hairs. I remember the time back, way back when you were at the mercy of whatever, programmer, editor, whatever, gatekeeper sitting in some office in Toronto or wherever would dictate what the schedule is going to be. And you will be watching this at 7:00, and you will be watching this at 7:30, or you will be watching nothing. But here we are in the age where you can watch whatever you want, whenever you want it. So me being politically inclined, or at least interested, I started watching political material. And at that time, in the Wild West days of YouTube, I would always get these recommended videos for these crazy 9/11 conspiracy video related videos on the sidebar there. And I would click on them from time to time just to have a laugh at how stupid they were. And some of them were stupid, but some of them made points that I thought, well, that can't possibly be true. So I decided I'll go check that out. I mean, did French media really report that Osama bin Laden met with CIA agents in Dubai the summer before 9/11? That sounds crazy. Oh, wait, they really did report that? Le Monde had a story about it? Okay, well, that's weird. Oh, Operation Northwoods. The U.S. government had a plan to commit terror attacks in the U.S. and blame it on Cuba as a justification to invade Cuba. That can't be real. Oh, okay, National Security Archive has the actual Operation Northwoods document there. That was signed all the way up to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, waiting on Kennedy's desk for his signature to implement. Wow, I didn't learn about that back in history class. So it was in that process somewhere that I fell down the proverbial rabbit hole and started researching this for myself. And it wasn't long before I realized, this is crazy, this is amazing, this is incredible information, stuff that I can put my finger on and prove. And I need to get this information out to other people. I don't know, I don't know what I'm doing, but I think I need to say this to other people. And it was at that time when I started myself discovering podcasts and listening to more of that. And here I am in Japan. What am I going to do? Go up to Japanese people on the street in my broken Japanese and try to tell them about this stuff? No, that doesn't seem like the right thing to do. It's the internet age. I'll start a podcast. So next thing you know, I never in a million years, I never imagined I was going to be a media personality with a podcast. I had absolutely no intention of it. But here we are, 20-ish years later, 17 years, whatever it's been. And it certainly had a more profound effect on my life than I was thinking at the time. But long story short, I'm never going to be a teacher. I'm never going to be a journalist. Well, I ended up being both. Oh, well.
When did you know COVID was a hoax?
I want to say probably about 2009, because I remember the swine flu pandemic that almost killed us all. Do you remember that back in 2009? Most people probably don't anymore, but I remember it because I was covering it for the Corbett Report at the time. For people who don't remember, there was a swine flu hysteria that swept the world in 2009. It was the first time the World Health Organization declared a fake. That's not my acronym, that's theirs, PHEIC, a Public Health Emergency of International Concern, which was something that they instituted in their 2006 international regulations, health regulations that were rubber stamped at that time. The first time they ever declared this public health emergency of international concern was for the swine flu pandemic of 2009. And I remember it here in Japan because at the time I was teaching in the public schools. And they, if one student so much as developed the sniffles, the whole class would be on, the whole class would go home for a week. And I had a couple of schools, they closed the schools. The entire school closed because there were students getting sick. Fast forward a few months after the initial declaration, and it turns out, actually, not only was this not a particularly devastating flu, it was actually less severe than a regular flu season. So what on earth happened? And it was at that point you got the Council of Europe and some other organizations basically doing an investigation, finding that the people who were on the board that advised then WHO Director General Margaret Chan to declare that fake were themselves largely beholden to the pharmaceutical manufacturers who, oh, by the way, because of the declaration of that emergency situation, automatically generated billions, ultimately, of dollars in antivirals and vaccines and other things. Do you remember the swine flu vaccine scare that was going on in 2009. I remember that because I remember watching the reports from CBC there in Calgary of interviewing people on the street who were panicking because the big lineups at the clinics, they didn't have enough vaccines for everyone. And people are lining up going, oh, the brainiacs here at Alberta Health just don't understand, how many vaccines we need. Why can't they get this rolled out? I remember watching people at the Council on Foreign Relations talking about how to essentially create artificial scarcity in the vaccines in order to create the demand for those vaccines in the public, et cetera, et cetera. So I watched all of this, and I created a podcast in 2009 on the subject of medical martial law, talking about all of the infrastructure, legislative and institutional infrastructure for the declaration of a big scamdemic, essentially, that was laid essentially over the course of the past 2 decades, from the point of the anthrax attacks of 2001, which most people forget about these days, onwards. There were all of these legislative moves that were being made. I looked at the US context specifically, mostly in my report, but it was worldwide, as evidenced by the WHO. So from that point, I saw the Zika scare, I saw the Ebola scare, I saw scare after scare that was coming along. Oh my God, everyone needs vaccines. We need all of these new methods. So when it occurred in 2020 that they pulled the trigger on the next public health emergency of international concern, COVID-19, I think I was prepared to understand what was going on. The only thing I was not prepared for was the public reaction. I genuinely was surprised how quickly and how easily most people fell into line with the narrative.
I find this very fascinating because I started this podcast. It'll be 6 years ago, 2019, but it took until 2021 to start to have these types of conversations. So, being Albertan, I got to interview like Glenn Sather, right? I was a hockey player. So I was down that rabbit hole. I was down Don Cherry, I was Paul Bissonnette from Spittin' Chicklets. I was having these like cool sports conversations, and then COVID hit and it wouldn't go away. And so I've always wondered, and with my event coming up, I guess, in May, part of my mindset, James, has been, I want to know when the next one's coming so that we don't make the same mistakes. I find this conversation very fascinating because I'm like, it's like I can talk to my future self somewhat, right? I don't think I'll be living in Japan, but you never know. But the podcasting world and the things you're talking about, I'm like, okay, very interesting. So when you look at the future, okay, so you're saying 2009 for COVID. Honestly, that makes sense to me. You saw the mapping of how they're going to try and do it. And back then it didn't take because, in 2009, I was in college, folks. And let me tell you, I wasn't worried about no swine flu. And you go on and on and on. And the thing that surprised you was the human being reaction to the same thing they'd done how many times before. So where we sit today, what has James Corbett's tail feathers up? Or like, we got to be looking at this because everyone says, oh, they're gonna bring back in monkeypox, or they're gonna bring back in this, and I'm like, the avian flu, and I'm like, I don't see how human beings react the same way, knowing on the other side of that is lockdown, snitch lines, hotel, whatever the heck they called them, folks. I don't even want to talk about it anymore. Yeah. But regardless, it was insane here in Canada, as you would know. I don't see people, no matter how bad it gets, going back to that. So what is the thing that James sees as a real concern of where we sit today?
I would sincerely like to believe that a lot more of the public would at the very least have their antennas up if they tried literally the exact same playbook as they did in 2020. I don't think people would fall for it quite as easily. However, there are things to think about. First of all is, what if there was the release of a genuine, truly deadly biowarfare agent of some sort that could actually do what they were saying COVID was going to do and actually kill large numbers of people? Would people freak out, panic, and do whatever the government says in that situation? Potentially. Potentially they would, yes. Also, I think there are a lot of different ways that this power can be wielded. One of the things that I think that the scamdemic was really about was the cementing into place of various changes to essentially the biosecurity governance of the world. And for people who really want to know about that on a philosophical, legal level, there is an excellent compendium of short essays and articles by Giorgio Agamben. He's an Italian philosopher / historian, legislative expert, etc., who's written about such things as the state of exception, like emergency rules and things like this, and exceptions that are made in constitutions. He was the one who implanted in my mind early in 2020 the concept of biosecurity as a governance paradigm. I have on my bookshelf somewhere behind me his book. It's a collection called Where Are We Now? That I would recommend people who are interested in this topic should check out, because, again, short, punchy, to the point articles about the biosecurity state that I think was an incredibly important part of the formation of the consciousness of what COVID did, which is essentially that public behavior can be governed essentially by technocrats and experts, and that your participation in the public sphere can be delimited by those experts at the flip of a switch, the push of a button. Now, thankfully, there has been pushback against that, and we are starting to see various governments doing their retroactive analyses and things. And I'd like to hear more about what the Alberta Task Force concluded, because I heard about that report. I never actually read it myself, so I'd be interested to hear about that and what you found from it. But having said that, I think part of what was going on, you could put your finger on a particular conference that was held in October of 2019 at almost the same time that Event 201 was happening. For people who don't know about that, a biosecurity simulation that was put on by Johns Hopkins and the CIA, essentially, and the CDC and various other alphabet soup agencies that simulated a international coronavirus pandemic at the time that we are told that the coronavirus pandemic was actually starting. What a wonderful coinkydink. And just as a little extra treat, the attendees of that Event 201 got little plushies in the shape of a coronavirus back in October 2018. Anyway, at around the same time, the Milken Institute held a discussion on the future of vaccines that was attended by people like Anthony Fauci and Dr. Bright at that time of I want to say DARPA. It wasn't DARPA. National Institutes of Health and other representatives were there talking about the future of vaccines, specifically the remarkable developments in DNA and mRNA vaccines that were coming into view at that time. We know this technology exists. We know we could be using it, but you can hear them lament in that conference, which is on C-SPAN. People can go watch it for themselves. Please don't take my word for it. They are talking about how, unfortunately, it'll take at least a decade and billions of dollars of investment by all of these pharmaceutical companies to actually get these mRNA vaccines and novel vaccine technologies through. It would be so much easier if the government could come in and declare some sort of emergency, if there's some sort of really big flu pandemic or something, we can essentially use the strong arm of government to get these emergency approved. A few months later, wow, COVID-19 is spreading around the world, and exactly that is what took place. The emergency use authorization was declared for these novel experimental vaccines. And now, now people might think of COVID in the context of COVID-19, and that was that, and it's over. But no. An entire new pharmacological paradigm has just opened up with essentially what is a type of gene therapy that has been suddenly allowed and is now perfectly, wow, yeah, that's a time-tested technology. We've had that for so long now. It's been years. It's fine. And you get, for example, Trump and others coming in talking about how we're going to cure HIV with new mRNA vaccine technology. So it has been completely normalized, which I think is one of the important points of the entire scamdemic era. Whatever you think of what happened, it's what's coming that I think is more concerning.
Well, right there, what's coming? You know, when you point out that they've normalized mRNA technology, you know, people are I don't know. I mean, you go, people applaud Trump being in, amazing. He won't talk about Project Warp Speed. He won't do any of that. And then, you know, if you're a diehard Trumper, you kind of give him a pass because he knows what he's doing and he's going to take it down from the inside and on and on and on. And I don't know. I guess I'm kind of curious, like, where do you think we're going with mRNA being so, as you excellently pointed out, normalized? It's just like, oh no, it's just part of It's in Alberta. We got Danielle Smith. She's amazing, but we can't seem to get anything done about this vaccine, which, I don't even want to call it a vaccine.
And update, I just saw a new headline from globalresearch.ca that yet another study proving not only the ineffectiveness of the COVID-19 vaccines, but the actual reverse efficacy. And in fact, you are more likely to become sick after taking the vaccines. Yet another study showing that, for whatever that's worth. So yeah, why will absolutely no government actually outlaw, or at the very least review these well, let's see what RFK Jr. does, and let's hold our breath waiting for the savior from the political heavens. I'm not so optimistic on that front, but whatever. I could be wrong, and I hope I am. But having said that, yes, in fact, it's about to get even worse, and I can say that advisedly because I'm sitting here in Japan, which, as far as I know, so far is the only country in the world to have approved for human use the next iteration of this technology, which is self-amplifying mRNA vaccines, also known as Replicon vaccines. So this is a wonderful new innovation because, they had to inject this mRNA, whatever it was, the plasmid that would start to manufacture whatever protein they say to manufacture in this super precise way, guys, that totally just stays in your arm. Oh, wait, it's all over your body. It's causing all these problems. Don't look into that too deeply. But now with the self-amplifying mRNA vaccines, essentially they will be able to inject just a tiny amount into you, which will then start creating more mRNA that will then manufacture more proteins within your own body. What could go wrong? Well, I guess we're going to find out here in Japan, where they're on I think last October was the 8th round of boosters for the COVID scamdemic, which Japan has had a remarkably large uptake, partly probably due to the demographics of the aging population and old people being particularly scared and particularly malleable to psychological manipulation on this front and at the whim of their doctors. At any rate, there has been a large uptake of booster after booster after booster of these so-called vaccines. And last October was the first round of Replicon vaccines that were available for those boosters, i.e. the self-amplifying mRNA technology. So that, again, they just keep pushing this forward and pushing it forward and pushing it forward. And I'm sure most people are, as you say, they don't want to think about it. They don't want to talk about it anymore. That was so 2020. Why are you still talking about it? Well, because it's still going on and they're still pushing forward with this brave new world.
Man, you sitting in Japan, just an interesting worldview, because obviously being Canadian then over there just kind of gives you a different set of eyes. Like you probably heard about Canada. You're like, what are they doing? Meanwhile, you have Replica and you're like, what are we doing? Why is that happening in Japan? Do you have any thoughts on that?
It is a very good question because what was interesting to me, again, having lived here for over 2 decades now, there is or has been a perception, at the very least, of, if not, well, yes, I guess vaccine hesitancy. I usually hate that term because it's usually framed in a way to psychologically manipulate people into thinking that they don't hold the position that they do, which is to say, when someone has valid and genuine concerns about the safety of a vaccine, they will be called vaccine hesitant. Oh, you're just hesitant to receive this because you're not ready to. But once we explain it to you, then you'll be. It's a type of psychological manipulation tactic that unfortunately works on a lot of people who don't understand how neuro-linguistic programming works. But having said that, I think the Japanese population really has had a sort of vaccine hesitancy. There was a vaccine rollout in the 90s, and I don't have all of the details off the top of my head, but there was a vaccine rollout here in the 90s that resulted in, I believe, some children dying and some getting very sick. And that created a stir in the Japanese population. There was a lot of pushback against that. And as a result, the childhood vaccination schedule here in Japan is much less than, I believe, either in Canada, and especially of course, in the US. And so at the beginning, back in 2020, 2021, when they were talking about, this new vaccine that's going to roll out, Japan was a particular focus of concern because of Japan's famous vaccine hesitancy. Will they take this at all? Well, it turns out they did. And in fact, in one of the leading countries in the world in terms of vaccine uptake. I think something like 80% of the population plus had at least the first round of shots. So unfortunately, whatever hesitancy existed was collapsed by the incredible propaganda campaign we saw here. So why are they pushing this new technology here in particular? And honestly, I don't have the answer to that. There is clearly some combination of financial and governmental interests that have aligned on this in particular. But I don't know exactly what wheeling and dealing is going on. I know that the Replicon vaccine was tested in, I believe it was tested in Vietnam, but is being manufactured and pushed on the Japanese public. And as I say, as far as I know, Japan is still the first and only country to have approved this technology so far. So there's clearly bread being buttered on some side by some apparatus of the biosecurity state globally that is pushing on the Japanese. And there are clearly receptive forces here in Japan. The company that has the license to make this particular shot, it isn't the actual one that owns the patent or what have you, but the one that has the license in Japan to make this is a bizarre corporate entity here that is known by most Japanese as a confectionery manufacturer. They're a candy and chocolate manufacturer, essentially. It would be like if Nestle was in charge of some vaccine rollout, but they have this arm that's a pharmaceutical arm that they are using to push this. So you'd have to talk to an actual Japanese biosecurity researcher to know all of the sort of the financial side of what is happening here. But clearly there is leverage being pushed, and I think to some extent it is because the Japanese public is largely malleable. Back in the post-war administration occupation of Japan, post-World War II, MacArthur famously called the Japanese a nation of children. And you know what? I mean, my family's Japanese. I love my Japanese friends and family, but there is some truth to that. All you need to really, truly change Japanese perception on a dime is a cute cartoon character and a nice, public ad rollout, and most people will line up, roll up their sleeves, and do whatever their boss tells them. And it's still very much essentially a neo-feudal society here, and people don't generally like to resist too much. So that might be one of the reasons why they're rolling it out here.
I'm fascinated in finally getting to talk to you. I think of 20 plus years of doing this and staring at some of the most controversial subjects in our time, right? I think of 9/11 and if this is the first time of hopping on the Shaun Newman podcast and you hear things tossed around so lightly, you can rewind the clock on this thing and find a time where Shaun is skeptical of just about anything. I'm curious, like on your journey, because you talked about on the side, these videos of 9/11, every once in a while you click on one, and then you look at it, sometimes, and I'm just reiterating what you already said, but basically, eventually something triggers you, captures you, makes you go, huh. On your search down that path, what did you eventually find? Like, what did you eventually get to? And it could be 9/11 or it could just be general on how the world and different governments all interact. I guess I'm just kind of curious. Where did that journey take you?
It's a good question, and there are different ways that I could answer that. But perhaps the easiest way, I think, for people who are, for whom this still sounds crazy or out there on a limb, the easiest way to describe it is I discovered that the rules of human society that have governed human society ever since recorded history began still apply. Shock, surprise, which is to say, powerful people. Powerful and wealthy people conspire with other powerful and wealthy people to maintain and expand their power and wealth. This is not a controversial observation. In fact, you could look at any time in human history, in any culture, in any civilization in the past, and it would be completely uncontroversial to remark, this pocket of oligarchy was working to expand its power in this part of, the ancient Roman Empire or whatever it is. But no, it's specifically in our time. No, that doesn't exist anymore. No. So essentially what I found is, yes, what has happened all throughout history continues to happen. And the public has been gaslit consciously for generations at this point with the idea that if you so much as raise the concept that powerful and wealthy people would conspire with other powerful and wealthy people to maintain and expand their power and wealth, you're a, say it with me, crazy conspiracy theorist. And of course, I will point out the CIA document, which off the top of my head, 1035-960. Please, somebody fact check me on that. And when you do, you will find the actual memo that was sent from the CIA, dispatched to its Mockingbird arm, which was revealed in the 1970s in the Church hearing. Oh, by the way, yes, the CIA does have agents in the media that they use to seed propaganda out. Don't worry, guys, we won't do that anymore. But they did in the 1960s when they sent out this memo in the wake of the Warren Commission report, and some of the people like Mark Lane and other researchers who were starting to raise questions about this magic bullet theory and this lone assassin and all of this. And the CIA sent out a memo that you can go and read for yourself. Do not take my word for it. Go and read the actual memo where they say, you know, we're going to have to counter this. And one way to do that is, of course, to point out that these conspiracy theories are not based on fact and blah, blah, blah. And we can counter with talking about the seriousness of the Warren Commission, et cetera, et cetera. And wouldn't you know it, lo and behold, from that point on, the concept of conspiracy theorist, conspiracy theory became embedded in the public consciousness. It was used in the media as a pejorative, which, yes, and some people will strawman this by saying, well, they didn't invent the term conspiracy theory. It had been used in this publication in 1922 or whatever. Yes, of course, the term itself existed before that point, but it was not a pejorative. It's a descriptive. It's a declarative. Someone theorizes about a conspiracy. What does a detective do? A police detective. They theorize about how people conspired to commit a crime. There's nothing in and of itself in that term that would actually lead you to ridicule the person who so much as theorizes about a conspiracy. So anyway, I essentially had to break through all the propaganda and conditioning that I'd been subjected to in the lovely Canadian public indoctrination system for the first couple of decades of my life to overcome all of those biases and blocks and realize, oh, essentially people are conspiring with each other. So, for example, here's a specific concrete example. So as I was going on this journey, falling down the rabbit hole, discovering all these interesting pieces of information, one thing that came up, I came across this documentary that was talking about the battle in Seattle, the WTO protest back in 1999, if memory serves, which I remember at the time because I was attending U of C at that time. So I remember one of my classmates had actually gone to Seattle to participate in and had these crazy stories about, because as people may or may not remember, back in 99, there was a big World Trade Organization protest. They were protesting against this globalization and the corporate takeover of America, Canada, North America, the world. And there was a massive police crackdown on the protests, and it became this big event that people may or may not remember. I saw this documentary as I was falling down the rabbit hole that was pointing out, actually, there were provocateurs who were undercover police agents of some sort who were sent into those protests in order to provoke the police, in order to garner the reaction, the crackdown that resulted in the mass arrests. Because, look, you saw these protesters, they were going crazy. The Black Bloc, these guys suddenly came on with masks and started smashing windows, so we had to crack down on the protesters. And this documentary was asserting, no, essentially this was a type of false flag operation where the police were dressing up as the protesters to go provoke the crackdown that came. And I remember seeing that and seeing the evidence for that and thinking, well, that's interesting. Okay, let me put that on board. Let me calculate this. The very next year, 2007, so at the time I was starting the Corbett Report, there was another protest movement that was developing around the SPP, the Security and Prosperity Partnership, which people may or may not remember. Bush and Harper and Fox in Mexico, the three amigos of the North American Union, were proposing this Security and Prosperity Partnership, a shared continental security perimeter, border, customs border, etc. Essentially, the preparatory stages to the formation of some sort of North American Union. And a lot of people were getting upset about that. And interestingly, in America, it was a lot of people on the right side of the right-left spectrum. In Canada, it was a lot of people on the left side of the left-right spectrum. So what does that tell you? But at any rate, there was a lot of people that were concerned about this. And they ended up having, in 2007, a meeting in Montebello, Quebec. and it was a secretive, closed door meeting, public not allowed. And people were asking questions about it. There was this proposal for a North American superhighway, NAFTA superhighway, that was going to connect to these and start the formation of some sort of shared economic, breaking down economic borders between the countries. People were getting concerned about this. Harper was asked about it, and he said, "Oh, people are concerned we're building some sort of North American superhighway, or is it a highway to Mars? Ha ha ha." But all we're doing is we're just regulating we're just harmonizing regulations of jelly beans. Ha ha ha. It was all a big joke, essentially. But people were not taking it as a joke. People understood what was happening, the corporate takeover of their government. So there was a huge protest at Montebello, Quebec. And I remember I was covering it. Someone had leaked to me certain inside documents from the SPP that had come out from a meeting, I believe a meeting in Banff earlier that year. And so I'd posted them on my website. I'd been following this. I'd been talking about the showdown in Montebello. I had a podcast about that. And at that Montebello protest, there is famous in my parts of the internet anyway, famous footage of these masked guys coming up to the police line, rocks in their hand, getting ready to do something. And you had other protesters going, "No, these guys are cops. No, these are undercover cops. Do not let them near the line. They are going to provoke something." And the masked guys get all freaked out and don't know what to do. So they just push into the police line. They get taken down by the police and then carted off. Some enterprising researchers took that footage. And when those guys get taken down to the ground, you see the boots that they are wearing have the exact same treads on them as the officers that are arresting them. So people pointed that out. People started to ask questions. Eventually, a month or two later, or whatever it is, the Sûreté de Québec admit, okay, yes, they were undercover cops. But don't worry, guys, whatever. They were just there to keep an eye on the protesters. Meanwhile, there is footage of them with rocks in their hands approaching the police line, about ready to start something with the police. Obviously, in the exact same way as was alleged with the WTO protests, to provoke the reaction. And when I saw that, I mean, that was just one of many, 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 many things that confirmed along the way that, this crazy conspiracy theorizing, it makes sense, it explains the world, and it turns out to be true. And yes, you can go look that up. Again, don't take my word for it. Sûreté de Québec admitted those were undercover cops that were there in the protest embedded, just to keep an eye on the protest, guys. Anyway, this is how the world works. And once you start to actually understand, and it's actually a lot easier and simpler to understand the world when you have the true understanding of the world, which is rich and powerful people want to preserve their wealth and power, and they will use duplicitous tactics to do it. And then they will gaslight the public to say, "You're crazy and stupid if you ask questions about this." Well, okay, call me crazy and stupid all you will, but again, I think my reporting shows that I know something about the way this world is really working.
When you look at two countries, U.S. and Canada, you had January 6th, and I mean, there's been enough information come out about the nefarious actors hiding in that crowd and everything else. And then you look at Ottawa, the Freedom Convoy, and the fact that it went off without anyone doing exactly what you're talking about. Sitting on the other side of the world, did you pay attention to those two protests? Were you surprised by either? Did anything stick out to you?
I did not follow the January 6th closely. I'm not American, so I'm sure it is important. It's just not something I ever followed closely. I definitely was following the Freedom Convoy because I was hearing about that from people in my own audience. First of all, before it was even a national news story there in Canada, I was hearing from the people who were watching the convoy rolling through their town in Alberta or wherever else. And the type of response that I was hearing from people, finally, yes, thankfully, someone is doing something. This is something. And so I felt that buzz from various people before it even became a national news story. So I was definitely following that. And again, actually, there still is that big question mark. Remember the Nazi flag that somebody was trying to fly there? Yeah, that was totally wearing the mask, flying the Nazi flag. Yeah, that was definitely the Freedom Convoy truckers just salt of the earth truckers flying the Nazi flag. I have my questions about who that was, really, but anyway, whatever. The fact is that what we saw in terms of the crackdown on the truckers, in a sense, it was absolutely nightmarishly horrible, but it was in a way good that they played their cards to that extent, because it showed in a way that a million James Corbett crazy conspiracy theorists who, could talk their heads off about it all the time, no one would listen. But you get to see, no, this is the cashless society that they're trying to steer us into, where you will be on some form of social credit, whatever, that they can flip on and off with a switch, and you will be disconnected from the financial system at their whim. They actually went out and did it even before we have all of this cashless society nightmare all in place. They just went out and seized people's bank accounts because turns out they can, I guess. Wow. Well, I didn't think they could do that. Well, they did, and they showed you exactly why we should never, ever cede that level of power to any government, ever. Because even if you love Trudeau or whoever happens to be in charge at the moment, what if, just imagine if one of your political enemies or somebody who might have a smidgen of personal greed or whatever it is happened to get into power somewhere along the line and decided to do that in a dictatorial way. Oh my God, I can't believe they have that power. So in a way, it was good. It was a nice mask off moment that we got to see the nightmare that we're being goose-stepped into. And it at least got people thinking about the nightmare scenario of a central bank digital currency or something along those lines and what might be possible under it. So in a sense, it was horrible what happened, but in a sense, I'm glad that it happened at the very least, because it was a giant wake-up call for the entire world.
You brought up Fox, Bush, and Harper, I think, right? Correct?
Yep.
Did I get those right? And them trying to sign an agreement to, I'm curious your thoughts on this 51st state, this Greenland annexation, this I forget what the term is, you probably know it, but essentially, being part of the 2030 agenda of having zones and just them being very big zones.
Yes.
And whether that is something that you look at and you're like, oh yeah, that's very real. Like, people need to be concerned about this. Because, I've had different people on now. They're like, I welcome becoming part of the United States. Or vice versa.
Yeah. There's a lot to be said about this. One is that I think, like the grand tariff war of 2025, which lasted all of 0 hours. I think that essentially people, it's fascinating to me that people take Trump's pronouncements at face value. We've already seen one term of this, so I don't understand why people don't understand at this point. He says the big silly thing that gets all the headlines, which is really just the preparatory phase to a negotiation of some sort that will result in, I don't know, a 2% tariff on timber from BC or something. I don't know, but I don't think this is a serious political proposal that's going to happen any day now, but it has certainly filtered down to the sort of general public and in the public consciousness, this idea of, what is national sovereignty? To the extent that it fosters a greater awareness and thinking along the lines of decentralization of power. Because yes, why should someone in Calgary care what someone in Ottawa has presumed to rule over them? Why are our laws and everything being set by this power structure that's thousands of kilometers away and has zero to do with my life here in Alberta? To the extent that it gets people thinking along those lines, I think it's good. To the extent that the idea is, okay, I'll take off my Canada cap and I'll put on my America cap. Yay. That would, I think, be detrimental to at least what I think is the real solution to all of this craziness that we see going on. Because it seems to me, as I said before, that what I'm doing is not particularly complicated. It is an examination of the way that power operates in society, and it tends to operate by oligarchical cliques coming together to try to maintain and expand their power. So how do we counteract that? Not by pledging our allegiance and our affiliation to some other oligarchical clique. Oh, that one will take care of us. And then, I don't know, the people who are excited about being, subject to President Trump. Well, imagine in 4 years if it's President whoever, Clinton or whoever you hate. Oh my God, how could this ever possibly happen? No, clearly the more thoroughgoing solution to this is decentralization of power. Why are we ceding more and more of our sovereignty over to these cliques of whatever sort, however many thousands of kilometers away in these various places of power? Why don't we try to bring power back down as close as we can to the individual? And I would argue, why not to the individual? But I know that's a radical idea that most people aren't prepared for. But at any rate, to the extent that it fosters that kind of conversation, or at least something along those lines, I think it could be to the good. As far as a political reality, I'm not holding my breath waiting for Canada suddenly to just, I don't know, okay, Canada doesn't exist anymore, guys, and now we're American. I don't know how they think that's going to work on a political level, but again, I don't think it's a serious political proposal, but it does raise serious questions about the nature of the political reality we live in and why people think it is the way it is, or the way that we can adjust it to be more fruitful and more promotional of our life and activities, and instead of being beholden to some power clique in some far off place.
When you look at the world right now, is there a place that, or thing, it doesn't have to be a place, an idea that really unnerves you? You know, like I just go back to 2009, you see the playbook of the swine flu, you're like, and then it takes over a decade to have something of that same idea to take root, take hold, and then transform the world in a way that is just almost shocking, right? When you look right now, is there an idea or a country, a war, disagreement, on and on? You kind of get the frame of the framing
Yeah.
I'm putting on it, that really sticks out to you, that you think people really need to be cautious of?
There are a few, but let me frame what I think is probably the overarching one that preoccupies us, or should be preoccupying us, which is essentially, well, the best way to frame this is to say that every ruling power throughout history has had some sort of justification, some sort of story they tell as to why they deserve to rule over other people. And back thousands of years ago, people literally worshipped the god of the emperor of Egypt as a god. This is literally God on earth. That got refined over time. And by the time you got to, say, the European monarchies, no. I mean, it's not like the king is God. He's appointed by God. God gives power to this king in order to rule over you. That didn't really hold sway in the post-Enlightenment era. We don't believe in that stuff anymore. We need some sort of new justification. So in the late 19th century, you had Francis Galton, who happened to be a cousin of Charles Darwin. Take that for what it's worth. He came up with the theory of eugenics. And it was essentially, although we would frame this today in our modern day scientific parlance, essentially the rich and powerful rule over the weak and powerless because they have better genes. But actually, at the time when Galton developed this, the concept of genes and genetics wasn't even actually formulated yet. So it was all this vague talk of protoplasm, and it's actually very pseudoscientific when you think about it. But anyway, the idea, which you could imagine would appeal to the rich gentleman scientists of the late 19th century and their fellow men. No, we're rich and powerful and smart because we have better genes. And all of these, why are all these poor people the kind of criminals who end up in prison? It's because they have bad genes, right? And what follows from that is a tale of horrors throughout the world in the early 20th century, certainly, really taking root in America, first of all, where you had all of these eugenic sterilization laws and other things passed, where the mentally defectives and the poor and the criminals had to be sterilized with their consent or without their consent, or even without their knowledge in many cases, in order to better the gene pool, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, that leads, and that those laws that were developed in America were literally the laws that the Nazis used as their part of their eugenics program, which they carried out. And obviously after World War II, and everyone's looking back at what happened and going, oh, okay, maybe this eugenics thing, from today's perspective, we don't understand it, but anyone who was anyone, it was the cause célèbre of the time. All of the, not just scientists, but politicians, Teddy Roosevelt and everyone was talking about eugenics and how important it was. But everyone kind of agreed after the World War II, let's kind of shove that under the rug. But that idea didn't go away. No, still, of course, the ruling oligarchs like to think that they are superior to the riffraff who populate the earth, the cannon fodder who populate the earth, according to one attendee at the Bilderberg Group at a meeting from the 1970s. I don't have the exact reference to that off the top of my head. It is on my website. I believe it was George Ball. People can look that up. Anyway, the cannon fodder who unfortunately populate the earth. No, that was not the Bilderberg Conference. That was the Fourth Wilderness Conference in Denver, Colorado. I want to say 1987. Again, people can fact check me. Do not believe me. Go look up my references. I'm not making this stuff up. Anyway, this idea still persisted, but they couldn't call it eugenics anymore. So one way that this ideology evolved, morphed, changed face, changed costume, put on a different mask, was to start talking about overpopulation. And that became the concern of the 1950s, going into the 1960s, heading into the 1970s. The UN environmental program, the UNEP, founded on the back of this hysteria and scare that was being ginned up by organizations such as the Population Council. Well, what was the Population Council? Where did it come from? Well, it turns out that the Population Council was founded by John D. Rockefeller III. And, it turns out the Rockefellers had been the primary funders of American eugenics back in the early 20th century, back when it was still fashionable to be a eugenicist. And literally, they just changed the nameplate on the door from the American Eugenics Society to the Population Council. They were literally using the same office. So they just sort of switched it over. Now we're talking about demographics. Now we're talking about population. There's too many people on the planet. You see, it's kind of the same ideology at this in a sense. We still need to sterilize people. We still need to get rid of the riffraff. There's too many people. We need to preserve it for us and our kind. Of course, that's not the way it's presented to the public. It's about, you're concerned about the earth, aren't you? Well, then give us power and give us the ability to go in and sterilize populations en masse. What could go wrong? So the population movement and the global warming movement started to meld together. The entire environmental cause that was, there was an environmental consciousness forming in the 1960s because of political activism and others, that was cottoned onto and steered in a specific direction. Again, you can look at specific things like the World Wildlife Federation. They've got that cute panda logo, right? Well, look at the people who literally formed the World Wildlife Federation. The very first people who signed onto it, the people who created it, were all literally card-carrying eugenicists, the members of the British Eugenics Society and others, because this was the new way they were going to start to steer this budding environmental consciousness in a certain direction. So where does the environmental movement go in the later part of the 20th century? Suddenly, the only thing that matters, the only thing we talk about is carbon dioxide. And of course, we don't even think about it in terms of what is the largest polluter on the planet, the US military and by extension, militaries around the world. We don't talk about that aspect of it. No, we only talk about you, essentially your carbon footprint. It all becomes about you. And ultimately, we're going to have to start carbon rationing. And ultimately, you're going to have to start to live in 15-minute cities, and we're going to have to control what you do and where and you can't eat meat. And essentially the creation of a neo-feudal system in which you are going to live as a peasant in this neo-feudal society, for the good of the earth, everybody. So it is the exact same eugenics ideology, this idea that certain people have that they deserve all of the wealth and power. They get to jet off to these conferences in their private planes to go and tell you that you are killing the earth by trying to, drive to work so that you can put food on your table for your family. That's the exact same mindset. And the worst part is in the 21st century, I think it is morphing again. Because we've seen, for example, infamously, in the past several years, even the Rockefellers have completely divested of oil now. They're out of this. BP is talking about, no, we're not British Petroleum anymore. We're beyond petroleum. We're entering the post-carbon era. We're signing the Paris Agreement. You had major oil companies that were on board with the Paris Agreement. What's going on? It's because the next iteration of this is technocracy. It is the idea that we're going to start ceding more and more of our life, our power, our sovereignty over to technocrats, experts who will solve our problems for us and tell us how to live. They will be able to calculate how much you need in order to live, and they'll be able to give you your carbon credits or your carbon rations every month, etc., etc. You think I'm joking about this, but unfortunately, no, this is a very specific ideology that was formulated in the late 1920s and early 1930s by a charlatan named Howard Scott and his sidekick, minion, M. King Hubbert, who is best known as the Hubbert of Hubbert's Peak, which is nowadays known as Peak Oil. He was a British Petroleum? No, maybe Shell geologist who came up with the peak oil idea, etc. But back in the 1930s, they were working together on this idea of technocracy, which was formulated in the Great Depression. People are casting about, oh my God, capitalism has failed. We need something else. There are some people signing up to be communists, etc. We need something else. One movement that was a huge movement in the 1930s was technocracy. And this was the idea, essentially, we're not going to have governments. We're going to have technates. And these are going to be sort of organizations run by engineers, experts, scientists who can know what they're doing. And what they're going to do is they're going to perfectly balance inputs into the economy with outputs, because capitalism has all these booms and busts and depressions and craziness. No, we're going to perfectly balance input and output, so there will be no booms and busts. Everyone will be happy. And the way we will do this, we will calculate every input into the economy, everything that is being made in the economy. We will calculate how much energy is needed to create all of that. And then we will have an energy budget for the nation, well, for the technate, because actually North America was going to be it's going to be regional units, and there wasn't going to be an American government or a Canadian government. There was going to be a North American technate. Sounds like 51st state type of talk anyway. But they were going to calculate the energy budget for the technate, and then they were going to divvy that up and give it out to the population as credits. So you would get a credit denominated in joules of energy or kilojoules or whatever it is, and you would be able to spend that on goods which would be priced in joules of energy. And when you're out of your carbon credit or your energy credits for the month, well then, I guess that's it. That's all you're going to get. So the scientists and engineers and statisticians and technocrats would be the ones deciding essentially what needs to be made in the economy, and then allowing people, generously bestowing on them the energy credits in order to buy that stuff. Total nonsense, total pie in the sky, crazy nonsense in the 1930s. The idea that they were going to be able to calculate every single input into the economy and somehow tabulate this in real time, and just imagining the paperwork, literal paperwork that would have gone into this, it would have been absolutely unthinkable in the 1930s. Fast forward to the 2020s. Well, actually, that's pretty trivial. We could actually database and track absolutely everything in the economy right now. And they could take all of this information and, well, I don't know about joules of energy. How about carbon? We can measure everything in carbon outputs, and we could have carbon rationing, and you could get your carbon ration card. And, oh, you're not allowed any more meat this week. You've already eaten too much, and that's bad for the earth. So we're only going to give you this many. Anyway, the concept of technocracy persists to this day. The actual technocratic movement, which was a movement, and I think Technocracy Inc. still exists. People can go look it up and look at their website, and you can read the Technocracy study course that M. King Hubbert wrote back in the 1930s. But that idea never went away. The movement may have. Although, just as a side note, who was Elon Musk's grandfather? Oh, that's right, the leader of the Technocracy Party in Saskatchewan, who essentially got run out of Canada, went to South Africa, and the rest is history, or actually our present, as Elon Musk goes up there to give his happy salutes to the fawning crowds. Literal technocrat who's talked about the Martian technocracy that he's bringing into place. You can't make this stuff up. And again, don't trust me. Go look up everything I've just said.
I have two thoughts, and I don't know how I want to end this. All right. I've been wondering about this for a long time. How do you, like, once again, folks, I guess this is going to be a common theme of this little chat here with James. For a guy who's done it for 20 years, and you read a lot, obviously, you've been studying a lot of what's going on, obviously, you see these trends happen over the course of what feels like a long time. I think 100 years, and every sense of it is a long time. And yet these ideas, these things just seem to persist over a long time. You think, oh, tomorrow is going to be the day this cyber attack happens and everything's going dark. Everything's going to be dark. We're back to the Stone Age. We got to prep and on and on and on. But I think about that. If you took that mentality of 2009 swine flu, this is going to come back and someday it's going to be bad. You would have waited a decade for that day to come. Now, in fairness, you would have saw it when it came. You would have, holy crap. But like, if you were talking about the technocrats back in the I think you said 30s, it's like, you'd be dead. It wouldn't even come into play. On your end, how have you, I don't know, I guess, dealt with that, I don't know, piece of the puzzle, if I would, because you're like, oh, CBDC or 15-minute cities and all these things. We can see them playing out right around us. Mm-hmm. But some of that is like, some of that is far-fetched, folks, for where we're sitting today. I'm not saying it can't happen, and I'm not saying they don't want it to happen. But we could be 50 years from it. So we're going to live like with our head chopped off and freaking out because of different things? I don't know. I guess, how have you found a formula to deal with that part of the puzzle?
That's an excellent question. And I think this is the first time I've ever had a question quite like that. And it's a good one to ask because perhaps see the way that I get this question or a form of it often is, James, how do you go forward knowing what all this craziness and all this stuff, and you talk about it and no one's listening and no one cares what you're saying and they call you crazy and blah, blah, blah. How do you keep doing this? And I've always just responded, well, I don't know. It's just my constitution. I just put this stuff out there. I don't feel responsible for what other people do or don't believe. It's all on you. Go do your own research. This is what I've found. So that's sort of my attitude, and that's why I don't get discouraged by the fact that a lot of people don't listen to what I'm talking about. But having said that, you put it in the right context because, okay, as I hope I have intimated here, I see these types of things and I'm able to apply. I'm no expert. I'm no wonderful, amazing genius. It's just I see an idea or concept like provocateurs being inserted into protests in order to generate a crackdown. And then I see it play out in real time. And then I see as the story develops and it turns out that was it. And I identify and notice a pattern. And so I can identify it again in the future. All right. So that helps me to understand the world as as things are taking place. There's a chaotic flow of events, but once you start to identify patterns and things that, oh, I've seen this before and I know what it is, it helps to make sense of the world, which at the very least helps me to position myself better in the world. So I have a better idea of what's really going on so that I know, for example, I'm not going to be led along by the nose into the latest, hey, it'll be so convenient if you just, I don't know, how about take this digital ID? I'll just need your little fingerprint, your retinal scan, and you'll get some free world coin or something. It'll be great. Perhaps there is a version of James Corbett who didn't go through all of this and didn't pursue any of this, didn't research any of this, knows nothing, and goes, okay, why not? Okay, it's the cool new thing. But there's a version of James Corbett who's sitting right here who knows, no, you know what? I don't want to go down that path because I know where it goes. And so it isn't a question of me just sitting here waiting for some thing to happen. No, things are happening. We are history's actors. We are writing the history books of tomorrow with our actions today. And so it does matter what we are doing in the world. And what we are doing in the world is influenced by the way that we understand the world or don't understand the world. So I just want to know as much as I can about what is happening so that at the very least I can position myself to know when an idea is presented to me as just some innocuous thing. If it's really something that I don't want to do, well, I'd like to know that, and I'd like to know why. Maybe that's just me, but at the very least, I think that gives me a better, I couldn't imagine being the type of person who just buries my head in the sand and goes with whatever's going along. I want to know what's going on. And I'm very aware of the importance of not myself as an individual, but just people generally knowing what is happening and knowing why they should or shouldn't do this or that tiny action that might seem like a little thing today. Like, here's a stupid but relatable story. So it was a year or two ago. Here in Japan, it has been very much a cash-based economy, and people use their bank book. It's not a bank card, but like the book that you insert in the machine, and it records on the paper every single transaction that you have in your bank account. Anyway, it's a thing here in Japan, and recently my book filled up, so I went to the bank to go get a new one, as I've done many times before here. And they're like, "Oh no, you don't have to do that here. You just do that on the app." And I thought to myself, so now I need to download an app to get this book so that I can start doing my transaction. No, I have always gone to the bank and just asked for a new one, and they just gave me a new one. Why am I suddenly now I have to download some app? So I was a bit of a butthead about it, and I made them just, oh, okay, well, you can fill out this paper and we'll give you a new one. Okay, well, let's do it that way. And that's the kind of thing that, as I say, there's probably a version of James Corbett who never went down this path, who would just be like, okay, whatever, I'll just download the app. Now I need a smartphone to do things that I didn't in the past, and would have been fine with that. But I'm not fine with that because I know where that goes. And if there are enough people who understand where this is going and how their tiny little actions today can at least carve out some space for some future that's slightly different than the one that we're heading towards, that's to the better. So that's kind of why I do what I do and why I'm going to continue doing it.
James, I appreciate you coming on. Hope it isn't the last time. And I want to make sure that I get you out of here before your hard stop. Appreciate you giving me some time tonight. And look forward to the next time we sit down, hopefully, and get to chat.